Hello and welcome back to Mark's NOTCAST, or if this is the first time you've seen it, welcome. About once or twice a week I talk about something that interests me, and by the look of my viewing figures, not a huge amount of other people, but that's okay. I'd like to introduce you to today's episode. I think it's about the 15th of May. I've been pretty busy recently, which is why I haven't uploaded. I have, between the 24th of April and the 11th of May, been to something like 9 shows. I've been to Margate twice, Ramsgate, London, I think 3 times, maybe 4, Brixton, Camden, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, and seen lots and lots of live music. Which means that, I started doing these during lockdown to kind of compensate for the fact that I wasn't going to gigs. Now I'm back going to gigs, and I haven't given up yet because I am stubborn or determined, depending on your point of view. And today I am talking about, and again, this depends on your point of view, the Pet Shop Boys 16th or 18th studio album, Nonetheless, released on the 26th of April 2024. It's been out for a couple of weeks. I know a lot of people have done reviews straight away, within about 40 seconds or 40 minutes of them having it, and come up with these big, long things just to grab views. And there's no point doing that because YouTube's last forever. First impressions last. And I like to give a record a couple of weeks at least before I come to a considered and informed opinion about it, as opposed to just pull something out there in order for, clicks and giggles is the technical term. And maybe I'm a little bit bitchy and a little bit judgmental, but would you really change me? Actually, some of you probably would, come to think of it. But please don't. I'm the only me I can ever be, and I can't do anything about that. So there you have it. So as I said before, this is either the 16th or 18th studio album by Pet Shop Boys. And that largely depends upon whether you count the Most Incredible Thing, which officially is by Tenant Low, but it's performed by Pet Shop Boys. And the Battleship Potemkin soundtrack as Pet Shop Boys studio records. I regard them as such because they're performed by Pet Shop Boys. In fact, there are 2 full-length album projects by Pet Shop Boys that we haven't had yet or haven't been released as well. So actually, technically, Nonetheless could be their 20th album. But for all intents and purposes, it is either their 16th or their 18th. And we're going to talk about that today. Or more correctly, I'm going to talk and you're not, because there's nobody else in the room but me, which sounds a little bitchy, but there you go. So, Nonetheless, released on the 26th of April 2024, the 16th or 18th studio album by Pet Shop Boys. I think this is obviously the lockdown album by the band. It takes its title inspired by lockdown. It's what happened after lockdown. Well, nonetheless, Pet Shop Boys still existed. Life came back. And to take a cue from the Japanese phrase about kintsugi, which is where broken things are repaired with gold, we can't go back to the way it was. We can only be where we are and who we are right now, and we can only look at COVID through the lens of having experienced it. So this album is the Pet Shop Boys Nonetheless. It is them carrying on as normal as the lyrics of the wonderful Bilingual has it. And it is the first album that's produced by James Ford with the group. James is not a vastly brilliant producer. Sorry, James, if you're watching this, or you're almost definitely not. In my opinion, he's worked with Arctic Monkeys on most of their albums, worked with Depeche Mode on Memento Mori, worked with Blur as well on the frankly underwhelming ballad of Darren. And from my perspective, there's 2 things about what a producer should do. One, you could be like Steve Albini, God rest his soul, and you're a recording engineer. You engineer and you produce the recording, and you come up with whatever it is. Oh my God, where's my microphone gone? There it is. Oops, I'm going to have to press pause and reassess. Sorry, minor microphone malfunction there. At least I'm not Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake. I think a producer has two roles, one of which is to enable, but the other one is also to challenge. And if something's not necessarily up to the standard, or perhaps not necessarily achieving the vision, or is there to add a different perspective onto things. When Iron Maiden started producing their albums, Steve Harris started producing the albums in his shed. I kind of got the sense that perhaps the band stopped being pushed so much. So there was a concept of the band becoming obviously completely both self-contained, like Kraftwerk, but also being closed off to outside influence. Whereas Pet Shop Boys do have different producers, but sometimes there's an element of if you're a huge fan of the band, is that you end up kind of not necessarily serving the songs, but serving the band, if that makes sense. So a producer, I think, should challenge a group. And I don't necessarily feel there's a huge amount of this in Nonetheless. And I don't think there's a huge amount of sonic innovation in the album. That said, Pet Shop Boys have complete artistic control, of course, and dominion and integrity. They wouldn't release something that they don't want to come out. There's barrel loads of songs in various forms of evolution, which haven't been issued by the group. It's not like Suede's A New Morning, where you suddenly look at your bank balance and you realise you're £1 million in the hole and you better put the album out so you can tour, so you can make up £1 million on that. This is comes in a number of different forms, nonetheless. So it's like many albums these days, there is not one definitive edition of the record. You don't just buy the CD and that's it. You know, there's this, nonetheless, backed with a second disc called Furthermore. This is a Pet Shop Boys web store exclusive. I think this one is white vinyl. There's an Amazon edition on clear vinyl as well. Let me just quickly check. This is white vinyl. There's an Amazon edition as well, which is on clear vinyl. There's your standard black vinyl, which is probably rarer actually than some of the coloured editions now, come to think of it. You've also got your CD, which unsurprisingly, I have the standard 10-track CD here. There is the double CD with the Furthermore EP. There's the Bluray. Hello, I'm a Bluray. So that's at least 4 versions I've bought, plus a coloured vinyl, or more correctly, a cassette edition, which you can get from the band's web store. So that's quite a lot of Nonetheless for your money, all of which are in different formats or have different contents therein. It's quite a lot, and I think that's where you get to the point where, not like in 2007 when the Smashing Pumpkins released, I think, Zeitgeist, and they had a different bonus track for each retailer that you bought it from, or Taylor Swift's recent version of the album, I think, is it the Midnight Editions, I think, where you get a different bonus track on each of the 4 different covers that you get with the record, but the bonus track isn't listed, and I sat there going, yeah, that's not great. Hello, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me. Not great, but then that's how people do it these days. Instead of ye olde days when you'd have a CD single with a couple of extra B-sides, these Pet Shop Boys still do that, for example. But you had a couple of B-sides and then you'd have a second CD single, and that would get you up the charts, and everything these days is parcelled out on various editions of the LP. So you can say, right, I've got a #1 LP. If you're a band like the Lottery Winners or the Lathams, for example, you have a #1 LP because you sell an awful lot of different versions and in-stores tickets and things like that. And then all of a sudden, ka-ching, you're back at number 58 in the charts with a bullet, and then you're out of the top 200 by the time your bread's turned. It's a weird market. In fact, one of these versions of this album comes, which I bought from Rough Trade because I needed a ticket for the band at Coco in London, which was £55 instead of the £250 at Camden Palace, Royal Opera House. So £55 for the CD plus a live show by the band at Camden's Coco to start off the tour seemed to me like the right thing to do. And really, it was like, well, you pay 45 quid for a gig ticket and £10 for a CD, right? That's a better price. I'm paying 250 bloody pounds for the Royal Opera House. So that's perhaps one of the reasons why the album is whatever number it is in the charts. I don't really care what number an album is in the charts. What I care about is the band that I love making good music? Is it able to continue making music? Those are the really only 2 criteria that I have, aside from, are they, happy? I don't want anyone to be miserable, apart from possibly a couple of my exes who, frankly, since they don't live with me, they're already being punished enough because I am fucking amazing. Oops, language, Timothy. But it's reasonable to say I spend all of my life with me, so I'm going to have to tolerate me. Where am I going? Taxi! For the NOTCAST. Yeah, there we go. First single released from this album was Loneliness. Physically only released as a CD single thus far. Probably will get a 12-inch edition. What I do like about the band is that they do still insist on doing CD singles and physical releases, unlike Depeche Mode, certain other bands that only do download releases, even though they have an aging fan base that like to own the physical thing. Loneliness is a fine Pet Shop Boys song. It is based upon a riff that Chris added to Love Comes Quickly during the Dream World tour. So when the band play Love Comes Quickly live on the 2022 to 24 tour, Chris plays a live riff of Love Comes Quickly, or over Love Comes Quickly, and then what he's taken is that new riff and put it into a different song and created Loneliness, the first single from the album. This is also, I think, the first Pet Shop Boys single not to have a remix ever yet, and it's been out for 3 months, so pretty unusual for a Pet Shop Boys single to not have a remix on the B-side, although one of the B-sides does have a remix. How's that grab you? Pretty weird, I must say. And it takes the idea of loneliness as an agenda item. So the lyric to Loneliness, which is also included in our 2024 book, annually, the story of Pet Shop Boys in 2023, features the, and let's just quickly go for the lyric. I'll read it out from here, which is about where are you going to run to now from loneliness? Who are you going to turn to now out of loneliness? And the idea of being in an environment where, especially during COVID, it was quite a lonely period, wasn't it? We had 18 months where pretty much we didn't leave the house. We didn't see our friends. We didn't leave the town that we lived in. Everywhere we went was walking distance. You couldn't really go outside of your own dialing code without having a justifiable reason to do so. You weren't able, I mean, there was a time it was illegal to have sex with somebody unless you lived with them, which was pretty weird when you think about it. There was this whole concept of loneliness as a way of life. And you think about how difficult COVID was now, considering we were all digitally connected through our phones, through our PCs, through laptops, Facebook, Twitter, and all these other things. And then the idea that what had happened if we'd experienced COVID before then, where we wouldn't have been able to talk to anybody unless we called their landline and they were in and we had conversations. You were only able to have one-on-one conversations. You weren't able to be, like me, a middle-aged man with a YouTube channel, because there's lots of those going around. I'm under no illusions that I am anything special. I'm just another middle-aged, boring man talking to his phone about old pop music, which there is no shortage of that in the UK, or in fact in the rest of the world. But also the idea that I started this podcast, NOTCAST thing, through loneliness, really, is, not being able to go to the pub and talk to my friends about things that interested me. So I started talking to my phone about things that interested me, and somehow carried on once COVID finished. I was about 7 months into COVID, and I was kind of thinking, well, how am I going to communicate to people? What kind of conversations am I going to have? And of course, that's the idea that is encapsulated deep within the track Loneliness, of course. The lyric about, oh, hang on, sorry, it's upside down. Wherever you go, you'll take yourself with you. There's nowhere you can hide from the loneliness that's haunting your life. Or as perhaps another band said, I've never been to me, because no matter where you go, you still can't find yourself. The concept of no matter wherever you go, there you are, to quote the great adventures of the Buckaroo Banzai across the eighth dimension. But the basic idea of this comes from that riff that Chris was playing during Love Comes Quickly, and then a demo was created that was a bit more Northern Soul, a bit more kind of, Motown, a bit more jingly jangly, to use a very technical phrase there. And Neil had already had an idea for a song called The Struggle Against Loneliness. The idea of thinking about the difficulty that people have either being lonely or being with people because they're lonely, and not being with people they perhaps shouldn't be. As Neil said, COVID really put loneliness on the agenda, and I've had the idea of mentioning Ringo by the Canal in a song for years from the film A Hard Day's Night, where Ringo absconds and wanders into various escapades along a towpath. A scene that will stick with you if you're a Beatles fan, and I am thinking of doing Beatles Notcast, actually. If you think that's a terrible idea, you should see some of the other YouTube channels about the Beatles band. And as Neil says, the song is someone saying to someone else, I know you're lonely and I can help with you. And then you tie it up with, wherever you go, you take yourself with you. You can't run away from yourself. It's actually, a difficult song, but what it is, and Neil said this, is it's a cry for help. It's a cry for sympathy. It's a cry for understanding, is that when you're, isolated, even we are just, ugly bags of mostly water, driving our own little, we're like ghosts driving skeletons covered in flesh. little meat skeletons. The idea that going, no matter how closely you communicate or connect with another human being, you can't actually, apart from if you're intimate with somebody, get into the concept of being inside and a part of somebody else. It might feel like that spiritually or physically, but it's not always the case. And that brings me on to a question which came into the NOTCAST a couple of months ago, which was about the video to Loneliness and should it have the blowjob scene in it. Sorry to use a rude word, ladies and jelly spoons, but it does. The video to Loneliness is on the Blu-ray edition of the album. This doesn't feature a 5:1 mix. I think this features just a super high-res audio. And it also features the video for Loneliness, which I don't like. And the reason I don't like it is because it is quite explicit. It's not exactly suggestive. It's quite explicit about a blowjob. And I kind of sit there and go, well, firstly, if that's what you wanted to see, there are other channels not on YouTube which would provide that experience for you and do so in a far more explicit manner. But also the power of suggestion and the power of subtlety is really, really important in art. Not everything needs to be like Oliver Stone, where he's clang hitting you over the head with the hammer of the obvious. But you know, when you see the video for this, and it's very clear what's happening, even if it isn't necessarily at the point where you get to see pubic hair, I kind of go, we've already worked out that there's a degree of intimacy that's happening. We don't need to be explicit about it, which is one of the reasons I'm very glad there aren't sex scenes in movies anymore. Not because I'm repressed and British, although I am repressed and British, but because I don't think there's many scenes like that in any films or depictions which are actually in any way meaningful. They're kind of a little titillating. It's a little bit like, oh, someone's got you know, a chest and someone's got a bum, and that's fantastic. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't advance the plot. It's an action scene involving naked people as opposed to an action scene involving cars and machine guns. And for me, also, it's pretty obvious, you know, what's going on. So I watched Terminator recently because it's one of my favourite films, and that sex scene, you know, that's happened long before there's, you know, shots of anyone writhing around topless with their various body parts out. And I kind of feel it not devalues, but it trivialises the fact that intimacy is meant to be a connection and a communication between two people and not just mere sport or entertainment. You know, and I'm well aware, if you're perhaps somebody that knows who I was when I was younger, you know, that's not always how I felt about it. But we mature and we age over time, and, you know, I love a bit of nudity in the right context. Maybe a Pet Shop Boys video or an Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie about the future is not the place for it. It doesn't add anything to the experience. It's just, that's a bit grotty, guys. Why are you doing that? I don't know. So in short, in answer to the question from a viewer, I think it's Michelle Wise, but I could be wrong. No, I didn't like that scene, and I don't think I'll be watching the video again in any great hurry, thank you, because it just didn't add anything to the song at all. Well, Loneliness for me is, and I don't even know where it got in the charts, it's quite a good song. It's not amazing, it's quite good. And it was being the first single from the album, was the one which really kind of trailed the album off. I hadn't heard Loneliness, even though I deeply, deeply love Pet Shop Boys, until I heard the album, really, to be honest, because to me, Pet Shop Boys albums are an experience. Singles in themselves, unless they're clearly delineated as not being part of the album, aren't vastly interesting to me. I like to experience albums as an art form, you know, a song cycle, or if you're David Bowie in 1995, a hyperlinear song cycle. But a song cycle of 10 songs that tell a story in some form or other, that address a number of thematic ideas. And it's like, well, you're watching like one isolated scene of a movie taken out of context, and then you kind of go, well, is that really interesting? No, I'd like to see what it sits alongside it, what sits after it. I want to hear the song in the context of the album, because its placement on the album is important. It's designed to sit in that spot on the album to fulfill a function and to complement the songs that come before and after it. And this is where I talk about the sequencing of the album. So I think Nonetheless is poorly sequenced as an album. I think the third track, which is Why Am I Dancing, should be the opening song. I think Bullet for Narcissus, the ninth track, should be second. And then I think we should have Loneliness as the third, and then generally follow the path of the album through beyond that. But to me, as I've said previously in my album sequencing episode, number 17, way back in 2020, good God, so long ago, that An album should tell a story. It should sonically tell a story. It should introduce the instruments as it goes along. It should have a sense of rise and fall, tension and release. It shouldn't just start like a starting gun and a dog racing out of the traps to the end. It should have a sense or a context to it, which is why AC/DC's Thunderstruck is an amazing album opener, and why, let's say, Hardwired by Metallica is not a fantastic album opener, because it goes at one speed right from the off and it doesn't give you any scope to build up to the moment where you suddenly go, here it is. Sometimes the tension, or more correctly the explosion, is more important because of the build up to it, not because of the fact that it's an explosion. And that's where I'm reminded of, I think, a film called Tequila Sunrise, starring, I think, Mel Gibson, maybe Kurt Russell, maybe Bruce Willis. So the DVD cover sells itself as this amazing rip-roaring rampage of action and violence with a yacht exploding. Well, the yacht exploding is in the last 30 seconds of the film, and bugger all happens before then. So you've got to think about selling what you're actually selling as opposed to selling an experience. Someone said, "Well, the yacht explodes in the poster. Why hasn't it happened yet? You know, the film's 98 minutes in." 99 minutes, so there's an explosion, and 104 minutes, the credits are finished, so the film's over, and you kind of go, I waited an hour and a half for that. Okay. So sequencing is super, super important. And this is why I think Why Am I Dancing should be the opening track on the album and not the third. Talking of which, second track on the album is Feel, which was originally comes from the pop art era. So written for 2003's Best of compilation pop art. But like a lot of songs, Pet Shop Boys tend to write songs and then find a place for them to belong some other time. So for pop art, for example, they had Numb with Diane Warren, In Private with Elton John, Flamboyant, Miracles, Luna Park, For Every Moment, and then suddenly Feel as well. So they had 7 or 8 songs of which they chose Flamboyant and Miracles for the album, In Private for the B-side on A Fundamental, and Numb as the single, one of the singles from the Fundamental album. So we kind of put those together, and then suddenly Feel gets released 20 years after it's been written, which is not the first time that's happened for Pet Shop Boys. One More Chance wasn't on the debut album. Some of the other songs, Jealousy, for example, was released 10 years after it was written. Sometimes songs just don't have a place on the record, but they'll get used again at some point in the future. And this is exactly what happened with Feel. Chris wrote the track. Neil put the melody over the verse, and then sang the chorus, You Make Me Feel Like Nobody Else Can. And it's got this kind of the way in which the melody kind of dances up and down. It feels a little bit otherworldly, a little bit Bjorkish, I think maybe is perhaps the way to talk about it, but not necessarily in a bad way. It just goes to a place melodically that you wouldn't necessarily expect Pet Shop Boys to do. Sorry, I had a moment there where my brain froze. They offered it to Brandon Flowers for one of his solo records, but he never responded to that, which is quite surprising, because if Pet Shop Boys gave me a song, I'd be like, of course I'm going to record it. Give me a chance to record an unreleased Pet Shop. Fuck yeah, of course I'm going to do that. And the lyrics got rewritten about 2021, and were rewritten with the idea of the British spy George Blake escaping from prison. And then this lyric was written about perhaps the experience of visiting somebody in prison and how they would make you feel about it, which of course COVID was in its own way a prison of sorts. We were imprisoned within our own homes. We couldn't go out apart from to the shops or to pick up prescriptions. It's a very different and strange world that we all experienced at that point, and I'm sure for many of you experienced it that way as well. But there's a line about, catch a train, then a bus. Well, I've got it all sussed, which is all about, North London and then getting to wherever you need to go to from there. And yeah, it's a good lyric. It works really well. I like what it does. It's got a sense of permanency, of being separated from somebody. So if you've ever been in a long distance relationship, or if you've ever been in a position where perhaps you wanted to see somebody and you can't, There's a fantastic lyric by the Twilight Sound in the song "The Wrong Car," where he sings, "Because I'm always waiting to see you." And you know, when I was in a long distance relationship with somebody I didn't see very often, that's definitely how I felt like all the time. Is I was always waiting to see them, because that was the time when I was most me, and the time when I wasn't with them was the time when I wasn't really me. I was a version of me, but I felt in some way a little bit incomplete. Obviously, that relationship has come to an end, so. Obviously, my world's a little different, and that means that that lyric, the concept of, I think, inspired by the COVID period, about thinking about people in prison being separated from each other by circumstances that they can't control. And whilst I said that James Ford didn't do a huge amount, he did add the bouncy octave bass line that goes into Feel, which makes a little bit of a difference for it. But it's not perhaps the best Pet Shop Boys track, but to be fair, there are something like 228 of them, so we'll give the band a pass in that respect. Third track is Why Am I Dancing, which I think should open the album. It's got this wonderful orchestrated opening, not quite to the level of Left to My Own Devices, but where it slowly adds all the elements in, adds the bass, the drums, the program drums, and then the instruments, and it just has this kind of sense of also questioning why we are here. So Why Am I Dancing is based upon a dance remix of the track called How Did I Get Here? And How Did I Get Here then turned into Here off the Disco 3 album in 2003, which was then remixed and then became How Did I Get Here? That then became How Do I Dance? That then became Why Am I Dancing? And so, for example, and I've done this, is where you take a song, you add extra bits onto it, then you take all the original bits out, and it doesn't feel anything like the song that you started off with. Almost like you build a house, then you fill the house, then you take the house away, and you build another house around it. Really, really interesting concept, and one which you can hear in the evolution of songs like Underworld and Res Cowgirl, or you can hear in the evolution of live versions of some U2 songs, where suddenly you start to hear, oh, that bit's gone into that version of Bad, that live improvisation of Bad in 1988, for example, or 1987, suddenly kind of points to All I Want Is You and the rising crescendo that sits inside there. Really fascinating. To hear moments where you can hear songs being born on stage. Really, really, really enjoy it. I did mention earlier that there were 2 unreleased Pet Shop Boys albums. One is the album about Alan Turing, which was played at the Proms in 2018, and I can't remember what that's called. And then there is another album which the band have written recently, which is a show called Naked, which is based upon The Emperor's New Clothes by Hans Christian Andersen, and it's about the emperor has a political opponent who's running for election against him, because the emperor is actually president. His opponent gets poisoned and ends up in hospital, and the lyrics to that became How Did I Get Here? And then suddenly became revised into Why Am I Dancing? And this was also inspired by the Imagine documentary about Andrew Lloyd Webber, which was had an idea about, there was something about Andrew Lloyd Webber songs. I think Chris called it an augmented seventh. I don't actually know what this is, and Chris kind of wrote it trying to channel a fake Andrew Lloyd Webber kind of musical theory, and then turning it into a Pet Shop Boys track. Really interesting idea, not always necessarily successful, but if you take all of that knowledge away and you listen to it just for what it is, then that's what it is. The idea of going, I don't have all the answers, but I'm trying to learn, and if I'm here to justify the questions asked in return, I'll need all the help that I can find. Why am I dancing when I'm here alone? I can feel tears in my eyes in my comfort zone. The idea of going, I spent a lot of time during lockdown in my house on my own with the music turned up, dancing around the garden while the cats looked at me in a bewildered fashion as if to go, you are crazy, human of Earth, what are you playing at? And I think, as I said, it was partially, in a tiny way, inspired by Here from Disco 3, but perhaps not in a necessarily a greatly obvious way. Chris thinks it sounds like Shameless, and since Shameless is one of the best Pet Shop Boys tracks ever, I'm not going to complain. It's really good. I remember when I saw Pet Shop Boys play Shameless live, I think in 2013, and my friend went, I've never heard this single. what's that all about? I went, it isn't, it's a B-side. That's your mind blown, isn't it? That's quite an experience though, isn't it? Where something like Shameless, I listened to that and I went, oh my word, if that's the B-side, the A-side is going to have to be amazing. Well, word up, kids. Certainly was, wasn't it? Track 4 is the upcoming single, New London Boy, the video for which was shot on Margate Beach last week, which is odd because I was on Margate Beach 2 days later, just before I went to see Bernard Butler play a place called Justine's. Justine's is run by that guy from the Libertines and is a basement bar. But it was a fine show, actually. Really enjoyed it. 2 hours, Bernard Butler, acoustic guitar, songs and stories. Really good. Really good, really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing him again. New London Boy originally had the title Spring, which was one of the demo titles, and is going to be the 3rd single from the album. Although I think I have to be pretty obviously about I don't quite know why. Pet Shop Boys have a line in ballads. They're really prolific in slow ballads, but when I listen to a Pet Shop Boys ballad, it could be a number of artists. I don't hear an inherent Pet Shop Boysness about it, apart from when Neil starts singing. There's something about the bouncier, more upbeat, high energy songs where I go, only that could only be Chris Lowe with the guiding hand of Pete Little and the producer. It couldn't be anybody else. But when I listen to some of the Pet Shop Boys ballads, I go, that really could be anybody. I'm not quite sure where it is. And sometimes when you think about, jobbing musicians that write songs for, I don't know, Madonna, and if Madonna doesn't take it, they hand it over to, Dido, and if Dido doesn't take it, then they hand it over to, Belinda Carlisle or someone. And then eventually somebody records it. Sometimes Pet Shop Boys ballads do feel a little like that, a little bit that they're lacking in an inherent humanity that's a little bit quirky and a little bit strange. Now that sounds a little bit bitchy, but that's, you come here, and if you can't tolerate me at my bitchiness, don't come here for my cats. That's really my view about it. The track was called Spring, and then Neil had the idea of writing a lyric about him moving down from Newcastle in 1973 to London and getting a flat with his friends, and then the idea was to update David Bowie's song London Boys. The London Boys, where David comes from the suburbs of London and goes into central London and is determined to make his mark. With New London Boy, the idea is that you go to London to find yourself. I did the same thing in my 20s. I moved down to London in my 20s when every street seemed full of ghosts where I'd grown up. And to recast myself as a different version of me, which I've done a number of times throughout the course of my life. When I went to university in 1991, I was overjoyed that I was able to jettison the conceptions that people had about me growing up in Birmingham. Moved down to London in the year 2000, I again had the opportunity to reset my life and start again from a different angle, and to let the mistakes of my past kind of be erased. As Tony Hancock said in his suicide letter, things just went wrong too many times, and sometimes you make mistakes and you have to basically go, no, that's it, I'm changing the environment and I'm moving to somewhere different, and I'm going to recast myself as who I think I can be. And you start again, and it's scary and it's terrifying, but at the same point it's very liberating to basically press the reset button on your life. And I think New London Boy is inspired by that concept of going from Newcastle to London to start again and to recast yourselves as who you are or who you want to be, and have an opportunity to make it happen. It's also inspired a little bit by the later Bowie song Buddha of Suburbia, which is one of my favourite Bowie tracks of all time. The idea of that, where he says, sometimes I fear the whole world is queer, which I spoke about at length during the Buddha of Suburbia episode, is the concept of being who you are, recasting yourself as who you are, and then suddenly going by what you're going to be, or what you can be, and reshaping yourself as who you want to be at all. So there's not a huge amount really to add to New London Boy. Not my favourite song, it's fair to say, on the album at all. Not my favourite Pet Shop Boys song by a very, very long mark. A little bit baffled it's the 3rd single, but of course I'm going to buy the CD single of it because that's what I do, And when you're a fan of a band, you're in for life. You grow, the band changes, you change, hopefully you change in the same direction, you have a lifelong relationship. I've got an emotional support record collection behind me, as you already know, so that's really kind of how I work with it. And, you know, sometimes, you know, like a bad day at work, you forgive the bad day at work, you forgive the bad single, because then you go, well, can't always hit you. Some days it just doesn't work. And then you go, right, well, after that, we'll see where we go. Track 5, side 1, track 5 is Dancing Star. Now, Dancing Star is the second single that's been released from the album. Again, like Loneliness, not yet on vinyl, but here on a lovely shiny CD single. Hooray, I love CD singles. Although they are perhaps not quite as cheap as they once were. I love CD singles, but Dancing Star there. This is, I think it's a really good song. It is a little bit obvious though, you know. I was listening to it and I didn't quite know who it was, but before the lyrics came in, I went, bet that's Pet Shop Boys. Sounds like Pet Shop Boys. Sounded quite flamboyant, quite overblown. Neil always thought that this sounded like it could have been on Madonna's first album in 1983. And then if you put the video of For Lucky Star with Madonna and her brother and the other dancer over this track, Neil thinks it would work. But there's an element of it being a song about something read in books as opposed to something that's experienced. I have a strong opinion about that, you know, although it was released on the 6th of May 2024 as a single, which means it's, you know, only 2 weeks old or something. It is a song which to me feels like just another Pet Shop Boys single. Now again, meow, but you've got a song about Rudolf Nureyev, the ballet dancer who defected from communist Russia to Europe, I think in about 1976 or thereabouts, jumped the barriers, I think, at Berlin airport, and then kind of defected and was accepted and then became a dancing star, ballet dancer. And that's in the lyric where it says, jump the barrier at Orly airport. Is that Paris, France? Who knows? And claimed political asylum there. Took all the KGBs by surprise. I think they thought that you would never dare, that you knew you had to take a risk. And, well, I mean, there's an element of thinking about your own life and going, well, I have to jump the barriers. I have to do things which people don't necessarily think I'm going to do. By the way, Barriers by Suede is one of my favourite Suede songs, and I haven't seen them play it for 11 years. So guys, play it more often. It's fucking amazing. But with this song, it's a song about history. I don't necessarily like songs about history. Unsurprisingly, it is one of the 172 Pet Shop Boys songs about Russian history and communism, if you take into account My October Symphony and the numerous other songs which mention, who do you think you are, Joseph Stalin? You know, West End Girls, the early version of that. There's lots of Pet Shop Boys songs about communist Russia. Which is odd, really, all things considered. But, you know, as my brother will tell you, studying Russian history doesn't automatically make you a British pop star. So Dancing Star is a song about a historical event, and it's more about reading something in a book, as Echo and the Bunnymen had it, and then writing a song about it, as opposed to anything which necessarily comes from real human experience. It's an observational song. I don't like writing songs about things that I can't at least extrapolate from experiences or situations I've seen. I don't think I'd ever write a song about Rudolf Nureyev. Although I did once write a song called Truckers in Space, which is terrible, which is inspired by that Dennis Hopper movie. Well, I can't remember what it is, which is exactly about space truckers. I think it's probably called Space Truckers. And I wrote a song about it to see if I could write a song to order about something which I saw on television. And I've got to tell you, Truckers in Space, which I wrote when I was 16, was the worst song I've ever written, and you will never hear it. I tried to channel Pixies in that, and in the end I came up with something that wasn't quite a pixie. It was more bullshit, but there you go. Dancing Star is a good single. It completely does its job as a pop track, and this was originally taken from a song he'd written called Eternal Summer, and then Neil had watched a documentary on BBC iPlayer about Nureyev and how he bought a house near the sea, and then he just looked at the details and extrapolated a version of his life story from that, and that was a really kind of, it's an interesting idea, not an amazing song, quite like it, but not amazing. So let's flip the album over to side 2, and since you've been watching this, I haven't actually got the vinyl out yet of Nonetheless, so I probably should, because you've been staring at this picture of these guys going for ages. So let's go for nonetheless, and let's go for side 2, which opens with A New Bohemia. No, not a sequel or a response to Bohemian Rhapsody. A New Bohemia is something a little different. A New Bohemia is just really a song that I don't particularly like. It's based upon the working title of Avant-Garde. It's based on an autistic or an artistic reinvention of a situation. So the line about like silent movie stars in 60s Hollywood, no one knows who you are. The idea that culture can only exist for a period of time. And I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's an author. I went, but hey, you're a published author. And he said, I'm not really. I'm kind of a nobody, and you know, the book that he wrote wasn't designed to be you know, something which lasted forever in permanency in culture. It was something that was designed to live for a period of time and then fade into irrelevancy as the waves of culture came over and replaced things that happened. And then you get to the point where you go, well, something exists only for a short time. Sometimes a cabbage can last longer than a prime minister. Certainly, I've had you know. Well, let's put it this way, I've had gigs postponed for longer than Liz Truss has been Prime Minister. But A New Bohemia is around the idea of going, well, you know, you were good in your time and now your time has gone. You know, although this is one of Neil's favourite tracks on the album, it came from the idea of A New Bohemia talking about, before lockdown, how Pet Shop Boys used to go to things like the Groucho Club. They used to go to places like Fabric, for example, and then they don't. And then all of a sudden there's a point where, you know, the lens or the focus of culture, like the Eye of Sauron, moves from one band to another band and you don't even know. And then suddenly one day you're a nobody. And Pet Shop Boys had that experience as well. You know, there was a day when you'd go to somewhere like the Hacienda and people would know who you are. And then 6 years later, the Hacienda doesn't exist and the bouncers are working in supermarkets and you're a nobody. And then that's, you know, is there anything worse than somebody that used to be a nobody? Or is it worse to be somebody that never was an anybody in the first place and was always a nobody? Who knows? Both of those sound like Noel Gallagher album titles, which I will sell to Noel Gallagher for a period of, or for an amount of money and a pint. But the lyric is as you know, Neil and Chris kind of recognised, is they were really quite lucky to be in exactly the right place at the right time. So I think about when I grew up, for example, and I grew up in the late 80s and the early 90s in Birmingham. Where I was where culture was focused. So after Manchester, the Happy Mondays and the Stone Roses, 1991 was the summer when, you know, the Wonder Stuff were number one. Pop Will Eat Itself were on top of the pops. Ned's Atomic Dustbin had a 1 million selling album. And these were bands that I saw in my town, in my high street, on my train stations that I was on nodding terms with. The idea that people from my town could be on top of the pops was crazy. And again, I feel very much like, for example, if somebody had grown up in Aberdeen or Seattle, felt in 1992 when the focus of the world landed on them and you're going, it's just a town, guys. It's just Birmingham. And Birmingham ultimately is more famous for Duran Duran and Black Sabbath than it is for anything else apart from the invention of the computer, or at least I think the computer. But when they were talking about, for example, that New Bohemia is about how culture kind of moves and changes, the whole album is around the nature of the concept of identity and who you are and how you're defined by your relationships with other people. And the idea that no matter who you are, nonetheless, that's who you are, whether you like it or not. We go over to track 7, the Schlager Hit Parade. Don't know anything about Schlager. Apparently, I think it's a genre of music that's very popular in a certain part of the world. You know, in the way that Bush are popular in America and not in the UK. The way that in the UK certain bands are popular and they just can't get arrested in America. And the way that sometimes a band has to leave its hometown to become popular and famous somewhere else. You know, if you're well, I don't know now. I'm thinking of a band that are huge in the UK but aren't anywhere else. And you kind of go, okay, so maybe that's your thing. You're just big in Japan, so to speak. So Schlager Hit Parade is a track that Chris never thought would be on the album. It has the working title of what I call it, Beer of a Laugh, I think. Well, Schlager is a style of European popular music that is generally a catchy instrumental accompaniment to vocal pieces of pop music with happy-go-lucky and sentimental lyrics, mostly in German. Again, the most obvious example I can think of there is Das Schusenfest by Faith No More, perhaps the strangest B-side I've heard in a very long time. And whilst people think of, and Neil points this out, you think of Hansa Studios as a place of David Bowie, U2, Depeche Mode, REM, Doom and Gloom. You suddenly realise, well, actually that room is also where 500 Schlager hits have been recorded that were popular only in Germany. It's around localism of culture. So side 2 is already starting to lay itself out quite clearly as being around, artistic identity, around invention and who you are and how you're perceived by other people. And the concept, as I've mentioned in the previous Kraftwerk episode, about World War II effectively creating almost a cultural year zero, wiping the slate clean, and German culture being effectively reset. So when Neil writes about the Schlager hit parade, also, of course, tying into the provincial nature of having worked at smash hits in the 80s, which ties into the title of the album, Smash. Track 8, Secret of Happiness. Not a huge fan of this song, originally titled The Autumn in Me. And again, it's inspired by watching Fred Astaire movies in lockdown, things like Babe Rainbow, for example, and things like that. Which is a Peter Blake piece of art. Is it a good song? No, I don't particularly like it. I think all Pet Shop Boys songs with the word happiness in should be banned, and that includes Happiness is an Option and HAPPINESS, Happiness, from the Super album, which most definitely isn't super. So any Pet Shop Boys song with the word happiness in should be removed immediately and replaced by the word miserable. So miserableism, heaven knows I'm miserableism now, and anything else that comes along in that type of area. This is, again, a song about something that someone's seen on television. I know during lockdown and COVID, there wasn't a huge amount of life experiences that could take place, but then use your imagination. Otherwise, I could have written a song based on lockdown, which was called I Watched an Awful Lot of Star Trek, which perhaps isn't the best title for a song. So maybe I should call the song The Final Frontier instead. I've got the final frontier and nobody's near. My COVID test is clear. I miss you, my dear. There you go. See? And that's perhaps a song for lockdown. There you go. Not a fan of The Secret of Happiness, although they do think that perhaps it would be from the same kind that they thought that perhaps George Michael would have done a great job of singing it. And he almost definitely would, because George Michael could sing the phone book and sound magnificent whilst he did so. What a pair of pipes that man had. Track 9 on the album. And again, we're going into one of my favourites here with Bullet for Narcissus. Absolutely love it to bits. It should be track 2 on the album. So opening with Why Am I Dancing, then Bullet for Narcissus. And Bullet for Narcissus, originally titled Getting Through, is a brilliant little song, which once you understand what it's about, makes complete sense. It's about one of Trump's bodyguards. And, I've said unambiguously on previous episodes, Trump is a terrible human being. I'm not seeing any evidence to the contrary. And the least of all the presidents that have ever been, quite possibly the worst leader of a nation in the past 80 years or so. The idea is the lyric is, I've got eyes in the back of my head for anything suspicious, and if my number's up, I'll take a bullet for Narcissus. Very clearly kind of contemplating that Trump is a narcissist, self-obsessed, self-grandiose, delusional leader. Of course, also tying in with the Powell and Pressburger film, I think the Black Narcissus from 1948, which perhaps is also another classic movie which perhaps shouldn't go unreferenced in talking about this. And although the lyrics are very obviously an AAA structure, so if you look at the second verse, it's dream, means, seen, mainstream, and then the third verse ends, eyes, denies, realised, despised. The third verse is vest, chest, bulletproof, truth. It's a pretty basic rhyming structure. I would like better lyrics than that. But on the other hand, classic track. I absolutely love how it kind of bangs and romps around, and should be the second song on the album. And then we close with Love is the Law, the first song written during the album sessions on the 22nd of April 2020, which is the title of an Oscar Wilde book, and they think could be possibly a James Bond film or short story title, Love is the Law. It's perhaps not the strongest song It has a typical place being a big epic length album closing ballad, but it's not what I regard to be an amazing piece of work. Overall, nonetheless, is a good solid Pet Shop Boys album. When you get to the age of 70, firstly, you're either going to have a new tube like me talking about bands that are dead that nobody cares about, or you could make a pretty great kind of synth pop LP, which, considering that Pet Shop Boys are at the age of 70, and they're making albums this good 40 years after their first record came out, it's still quite an experience. It's quite an achievement, and I'm really quite proud of that. What I didn't mention is the remix of Sleaford Mods West End Girls, to which Neil has added new vocals. And since that's downstairs, I'm not going to mention it now, but it is really good, and I'll post a link to it in the comments. But there's also the singles, which have come out from the album. As mentioned before, we have Loneliness, which is backed with 2 new tracks. That's Party in the Blitz and Through You. Through You, it says it's an extended mix, but there is no short mix of Through You. Through You is a fabulous little song. It's a 7-minute epic with a minimal lyric. And then we have Party in the Blitz, which was originally called Don't Drop the Ball, and is based upon a 12-bar blues, which they think could have been sung by anybody pretty much. Now the B-sides that are on Dancing Star, sorry, Dancing Star fell over, so I have to go down here. Oh, I got a lovely view of my carpet there, and you've got a lovely view of my head. Is backed with Sense of Time, which is pretty good. And If Jesus Had a Sister, which sounds like a George Michael B-side, but isn't. There's a Super Chumbo remix of Party in the Blitz, that's pretty solid, and a Solomon remix of Dancing Star, which is pretty good as well. So that's a 6-track CD single. Buy me, it's quite good. The last release from this period is the 4-track EP that comes with the double LP and expanded CD editions of the album. That is called Furthermore, and Furthermore is a re-recording EP of 4 songs from elsewhere in the band's catalogue. Again, featuring this, perhaps, I'm not a huge fan of this cover, but features re-recorded, rearranged versions of Heart, Being Boring, Always on My Mind, and It's a Sin, the 3rd new recording of It's a Sin, by the way. And those are good versions, interesting reinterpretations, and I think more bands should do it. But originally, in case any of you want to get particularly finicky about it, to use a very technical phrase, Furthermore was originally recorded in 2021, largely as a lockdown project, which then became a birthday present on an acetate for a friend of the band, and then they decided to put on the deluxe edition of the album to really kind of just make it just a little bit more interesting, a little bit more exciting. I'm generally loath to think of albums and re-recordings as being particularly good, but Furthermore I think of as just a fun little lockdown project, as opposed to a Def Leppard style, let's re-record our songs so we can license them out to adverts and get all the money ourselves, because I just don't think that Furthermore is anywhere near as cynical as that. Some editions have nonetheless come with a signed art card when you bought the bundle from the band's website. Oh look, you can tell what I did and when I bought it and where I bought it from, can't you? But also, it just seems like a really nice thing to have. It's to have a bit of paper signed by the biggest-selling pop duo in British history. As I've mentioned before, the band worked on the soundtrack and stage play version of Hans Christian Andersen's The Emperor's New Clothes, and they wrote a lot of material which didn't go on the album. So these songs include, and I'm just going to mention it, Say It Again, Theme, We've Got the Love, Lullaby, Bouncing Off the Walls, Rough with the Smooth, Suspension, You Don't Love Me, Living is a Lonely Time, the Naked Truth, I Dream of a Better Tomorrow, No One's Got Nothing to Hide, Uprising, The Spell is Broken, How Did I Get Here, which became Why Am I Dancing, as well as extra tracks including, and I'll have to check, Ice Remembers, Simple, The Man Who Got There First, I've Got Plans Including You, which was originally written in 1982, and November, and Putin's Underpants. What a fantastic title for a song, Putin's Underpants is. There's also, let me just quick look, Telephone Blues, and yeah, those are some of the songs which didn't make it onto the album. 4 of those, I Dream of a Better Tomorrow, The Naked Truth, No One's Got Nothing to Hide, and The Uprising, have been hived off for the Naked musical. Also, alternative titles for this album include, but are not limited to, Invention, Contact, Icons, Protocol, Vortex, Civilians, Sequences, Can, Convent, Von PSB, New PSB, Quite, Instant, Galore, that one's been done, Girl, no, Pet Shop Boys Girl, Code, Tangent, Blatant, By, Camera, and It. About the only word that's not included on there is Portfolio, which I think would make the name of an excellent Pet Shop Boys compilation. That is the album. Now, the band haven't played any live shows yet. The first live show is at Camden on the 26th of May, 2024, which I hope to see. And that will be the first show from the Loneliness era. The band have let out a sneak peek that they are going to be adding Loneliness and Dancing Star into the set list. So it's probably going to be following the same as the Dreamworld staging, with a couple of new singles that are on there. Pet Shop Boys, nonetheless, is their 18th studio album, and I think it's fair to say that if you're in a band and you're still writing and recording material as you edge into your 70s, you can do a heck of a lot worse than Pet Shop Boys. You can do a heck of a lot worse than David Bowie. You could be like AC/DC and constantly do albums with smutty titles and songs like Money Shot, and you kind of sit there going, not really interested in the sex lives of pensioners, whereas Pet Shop Boys tend to be writing about things that perhaps have a deeper philosophical and esoteric meaning about the nature of love, life, society, and existence itself, which is one of the reasons why I love them more than I love AC/DC. Because if AC/DC were 70-year-old disco pensioners, they'd be doing songs about, power and groove and rhythm. I mean, I saw a man walking around the other day in somewhere, and he works for a building company, and on the back of his building company it said, "Our erections always satisfy," and yet he was pushing a buggy with a young baby in it, and I'm kind of going, okay, maybe not. So I think growing old disgracefully is one of the best things that can happen, and I think the Pet Shop Boys are growing old gracefully, which is even better, of course. Nonetheless, it's a fine addition to the band's canon and body of work. I'm very glad we got it. I suspect we're coming to the end of the Pet Shop Boys story now. I don't think they'll be making records when they're 100, but it's important to be glad for what we have, and not that whatever it is over when that time comes to pass. In the meantime, thank you for spending 57 minutes with me monologuing about a Pet Shop Boys album, longer than the album itself, and the album has only been out for 19 days. So have fun, take care of yourselves, stay beautiful, and as the great Jerry Springer once said, take care of yourselves and each other. Okay, so I'm going to go now. See you soon. All right, thank you for watching, and if you didn't watch the end, it doesn't matter what I say, so because I'm not very grown up. Don't grow up. It's a trap, as Admiral Akbar said. Adios, amigos. See you later. Bye.